What I thought we would do before we start this, we're really just going to summarise how we think about an animal and what we would like our, let's imagine our perfect animal to be, accepting that that doesn't exist. What our perfect animal we would like, how to make it, how to create it from a sire and a dam, how long it takes, what sort of characteristics you can fix like that, what characteristics take multiple generations. But before we did that, we've got a number of examples here to use: cows, yearlings, little calf. What I thought we might do first is, if I can just go around and ask what you guys are looking for, because what we're actually going to do is talk about everybody's perfect animal, and unfortunately it'd be great if we all thought the same animal was perfect, but we don't, because we've got different purposes in breeding. So I think that's essential to understand as we start talking about this. The animal that's perfect for the backyard breeder who just wants a few quiet animals and pets is very different from the animal that's going to go into a show ring, and that can be very different to the animal that's going to be in beef production. So there's some overlapping characteristics, but we're all a little bit different. So I'd just like to get from you guys a couple of things that you actually want to see and want me to point out, or confusion that you've had, so I can know to tailor this a bit more towards what you want, if that's okay. We've got feet and horns. Perfect for Highlands. That's quintessential. Alex? So Alex has just mentioned the pelvic setup, where the hips are and how that relates to ease of calving. Yep. So there's some interesting things to talk about there. Some things we think that we should have, but there's some things that just actually don't make sense either with what we do choose for. Courtney? So Courtney's mentioned Highland type, and that word's used a lot. That book that was in there, that thought process travels through that book over hundreds of years, and if you look at photos of Highlands from 20, 50, 100 years ago, this varies quite a lot. So that's a really good topic to bring up. Temperament was mentioned there. So yeah, there's some hidden things with temperament, but we're talking about genetics from sire and dam, and maybe some other things that can relate to what their temperament appears like. This is really juicy, all this stuff. I wish I had done this before at talks. Head shape. So this relates back to the Highland type that we were talking about before. And it's a really significant one to talk about, because there's do's and don'ts with that as well. Okay. So temperament, we doubled up on that. I think we should triple and quadruple up on that. And general conformation that suits a show animal. So some breeding things there from Melissa, which was the age at which we should be getting them in calf, and how that relates to animal characteristics rather than perhaps what's in our head that we're told, and also about udders. Obviously it's a little bit harder to talk about udders on smaller animals, but there's still things that you can pick on yearlings that will give you information about udders. Obviously on a cow that has recently calved or is feeding a calf, a lot easier. Is there anything with these guys, as we've been moving around them, we're thinking about temperament here, is there anything about them that you might take account of, or be worried about, or love?
They're very calm. They're not showing signs of, I mean, they're wary, but they're not showing signs of you shouldn't be in here.
Beautiful. And I think, why is that significant with one of them in particular? Yeah. So we got a cow with a calf here, and 1-ish week old. Yep. So by a week they might be settling down, but often in the first few days they can be a little bit concerned. But that's exceptional, and that's, while that can be called instinct if they're really protective over their calf, for me it's still cut their head off. Like, if I can't be there and pick up the calf in the first day and weigh it, the mum might moo and carry on a bit, but I still feel safe. Or I usually get Bree to do this, actually, don't I? Yeah, I'm saying I. So yeah, temperament is critically important, and if we think about what our markets are for our cattle, pets, show ring, temperament's super important. It should be number one. What if we're talking about beef? I'm going to tell you, for beef, it is in the top 3 for what you should be selecting for. Does anybody know why?
Meat quality.
How does, somebody said meat quality, how does it relate to that? Yeah. So the worst meat you'll ever eat won't be from a Brahman or a really old cow. It'll be from any of the animals that are killed under stress. So they're dark cutters, and the meat is lucky to be eaten for mince and sausages if that's the case. So yeah, super important. And in the big production systems, there's one we dropped in on in the US that had a couple of hundred Highland cows. All they did was beef, and they supplied a particular small chain of supermarkets over there with just Highland beef, their own line. Their number one was temperament. Their beef production, that was their number one. Number 2 was feet. Number 3 was udders. There's not much fleshing, muscling mentioned there. So they wanted functional animals that are going to live a long time, keep producing calves, and grow the calves out well. Yes, they wanted a bit more muscle in them, but that wasn't high up. Temperament was their number one. So if we want to have a look at, I'm just trying to think through each of these things that we're going to talk about. How about we just talk about Highland characteristics first, because we can do that from afar. There was mention of horn shape and balance, like symmetry with the horns, and that's a pretty simple one, because even if they're asymmetric, that has no significance at all, because you take notice of the better looking horn. So if one of them is, actually there's a cow out here with one up, one down. So in the first probably 6 to 8 months maybe, if the base of the horn where it grows from is damaged in any way, then that horn can grow a little bit crooked. Not genetic, no significance at all. Go off the better horn. With horns that stay down, and they're both staying down, it's possible they were both damaged, but more than likely there's a bit of genetics to that. Having said all that, I know there's bulls around, there's maybe cows around as well, but I certainly know there's bulls around that have been used for many years in Australia that I call it, they have softer horns. So it seems like it takes much less to damage them and have them go a bit wonky. So it might just be 2 calves butting, lines with strong horns, which you can look at these two and they're classical horns. They're fine, which is good. This girl's a little bit finer, very feminine, but you look at them and you think it's going to take a lot when they were young to make them grow at a funny angle. But some of them certainly, when they're younger, we've had a bull that we've used that probably, 7 out of 10 were just not quite right. They're still sort of heading up, but maybe a bit asymmetric or just not doing the right thing, and they were easily damaged. That's an aside anyway. I did mention the fineness of the horns, so do remember that we don't eat horns, and unless you're a traditionalist, we're talking about a very aesthetic thing here that has nothing to do with anything else. Personally, I love it. I love their horns being up, and it's probably only the last 5 years we've started to focus more on that ourselves, trying to keep horns up. Before that, I'm not really that interested in it. But if we're going to have a look at horns and we want a Highland to look like a Highland, female horns head up, bull's horns come out of the skull at the sort of roughly the same angle, parallel with the ground, but they stay parallel, maybe tipping up at the end by the time they get 3 to 5 years of age under their belt. This is traditionally, back in Scotland, they like the female horns and the bull's horns, because that'll relate to his heifers. They like the base of the horn to be finer, There's certainly some lines that have coarser, thicker horns. They still go up, but they just look a bit coarser, a bit less feminine. Horns full stop. The word feminine, I'll mention a few things here. You know, the look of them. If I say feminine, it really is just that it looks like a cow, and most often it has nothing to do with anything else. So it doesn't mean they're going to not get in calf as easily, but if we're talking about a Highland a female Highland trying to look like a female and be feminine, that's important for the show ring, for sure. It might be important for our aesthetics to look at them, but you can have a bully looking, more muscular female, and that's still perfectly fertile, unless they're an intersex or a free martin or something. But if I say the word feminine and I'm talking about horns or we're talking about hair, that's about it. We're really just talking aesthetics. So we're making ourselves happy, if that makes sense. So finer horns sweeping up. What we didn't mention, the dun animal nearest to us over there is the bull. And as you can see, he's got classical bull horns. They stay down. He's 3-ish. How? 5. Okay. So his horns have stayed down. They've done exactly what you would want them to do. This is his heifers in here. And when we have a look at them later, you'll notice that they've got nice little horns. So they're level, they're even. I think one of them's not quite, but they're all heading up, doing the right things. Even though, as a bull, like you look at him and his horns are down, but that's just... Now let me think about this. When you remove testosterone, the horns go up. So the significance of saying that is, what does a steer do when you knock their balls off? Their horns go up. So it's not female hormones that make the horns go up, it's the lack of testosterone that makes the horns go up. So yeah, his horns stay down simply because he's got testosterone and he's thrown really good horns in his heifer. That's exactly what you want to see.
Glenn, sorry, can you talk about how young ones have the little
Hook
curl on the end? Because a lot of people ask about that.
Good question. We'll never get onto feet at this rate, but these are all good things. So when we get to look at the little ones, you'll notice yearlings-ish, 12-ish months old. They have, as you would understand, like 4-inch horns-ish, 5-inch. Yep.
Like a finger imprint.
So there's some, they all would have this at some stage, and some come off and some don't. So I call it a hook, only because I heard someone in Scotland call it that. So the horns go out and they just fine down, and then there's a little like bent thing at the end of their horn. That sits there, and the only significance to that, in itself, it doesn't make any difference to anything other than I love to see it, because if that's there, it means the horn has not been damaged. Like there's been no trauma to it. You can expect true horns, true whatever that animal can genetically do, that's what you're going to see. So generally, if you look at where the hooks face, they normally face slightly out and backwards. That just means they're going to have normal horns. So it's a very sweet thing to see, but they do get caught on things and they do get knocked off a lot. So I don't know, probably more than half of them have lost them by 12 months. But at 6 to 8 months, most of them you can still see if you're going to. Probably by a year to 18 months, they're just sort of wearing away, even if they don't get pulled off. They've just worn away. Probably by 6 to 8 months, they're looking their sweetest. But eventually by a year, 18 months, they're as good as gone. Okay, we might move on now to feet. So we haven't touched these guys yet, but we will. Somebody said to me once, we trim some of our Highlands feet, a lot less than we used to, thank goodness, but we still trim some. A friend said to me when I mentioned that we trimmed some of their feet, some of you may have heard this term and you may know this person, but they said, I trim feet too at the neck. So this is an Angus breeder. So they've got a very different bar for feet than what we do. Unfortunately, if we trimmed at the neck, all Highlands who had not acceptable feet, we'd be down to about 10% of the population in Australia. So that's just something we've got to work on and be critical of, but make sure we select the right bulls such that we go on and each generation gets a bit better. What we can say, and what I said back to this Angus breeder, is we do the same for temperament. So what they put up with for temperament, you know, we'd be afraid of and we'd just have on the truck. I would hope we would have it on the truck. But yeah, each breed has its thing, and feet are the thing for Highland cattle. Now, if we have a look at this girl, anybody have horses here? You poor things. Okay, but anyway, yeah, me too. Yeah. If we think about a horse's hoof, we can understand that there's a toe and there's a heel at the back and an angle associated with that. The problem with Highlands, and we were having a bit of a chat about this earlier, the problem with Highlands is that they don't have much of a heel, and this pastern, if we can call it that, or fetlock, this pastern is weak. So they sit down on the heel quite a lot. I've not been able to ascertain myself, you know, exactly why this is so prevalent in the breed. If you talk to Highland breeders over in Scotland, it's not even considered a problem for most of them. They don't put that in as a problem. And therefore they're not going to breed it out too soon, of course. Personally, I don't want to sell someone a cow that they've got to get its feet trimmed every year. Like, it's difficult to get a hoof trimmer out. It's not an ordeal, but it's difficult to get them out. You've got to pay money, you've got to fiddle around, and you're just going to breed that in the next generation as well, unless you find an exceptional bull. Alex has just asked if environment or landscape makes much of a difference, and hell yeah. Doesn't make a difference to their structure, but definitely does make a difference to how often you have to trim their feet if they don't have great feet. So there's a summer-winter difference as well, even in the same animal. You see them going through the bog over winter and you're thinking, whoa, that's not real good. And you get a few dry months, you bring them onto some harder ground and some rocky country, and you'll just notice them start to chip a little bit and they just naturally shorten. A good-footed animal, even in winter, they still have good angles and they don't grow long. But something that's got, you know, average feet can certainly look a lot better in drier country or at drier times of year. Does that make sense? So, yeah. Two things I look at when they're standing still is the distance of the little horn, chestnut, what's a dew claw, the distance from that to the ground on each of the feet, and how far the hair at the heel is from the ground. So just when they're standing, just get a look at that. What you don't want to be tricked by is trimmed feet. So if you go to look at some cattle to buy and you go, whoa, those feet are real short, oh, that's a good one, but the hair on the heel is still nearly touching the ground, you don't even have to ask have those feet been trimmed, because it's not possible to trim bad feet and give them that much angle. They're still going to have a poor angle. The other thing to watch is when they walk is how much flexion happens. So if you video an animal, like I find it very hard to look at a live animal and appreciate feet, but I know if I video and I go back and I just focus on the feet, because they're so pretty, I look at every other thing, but if you just focus on the feet when they're walking, you'll see extreme flexion, and those dew claws will nearly touch the ground in some animals. The other thing to be aware of is that front left foot each claw has a vertical crack on it. So maybe as she moves around, have a look at that. Highlands don't tend to get scissor toes very often, which a lot of other breeds do, which means that if we can imagine they're the two claws, that they curl around and they actually overlap, or one wears on the other. Pretty common in a lot of other breeds, but Highlands don't do that. They just tend to be a bit long. But one thing that isn't unique to Highlands, but seems to, and people tell me if you've noticed anything else with vertical cracks, but we see it in certain seasons where, you know, if we've got 20 cows, you might have 4 or 5 with vertical cracks, and then you don't see it for 2 or 3 years, and then you see a bunch again. While we're standing back and looking, there was mention of Highland character before. We haven't got onto much structure yet, but we can touch Jane, so we'll do that with Jane. So Highland character, we've talked about horns. There was a mention of head shape. The significance of head shape is with animals with shorter heads, that length from poll to tip of nose is actually proportional through the rest of their body. So it's actually rare to get, it's possible, and I've seen them, but it's really hard to do and rare, to get an animal with a short head and length of body. I'll talk a bit louder because she don't want to come over near you guys at the moment because her calf's here. So this distance, hook to pin, if I said hip before, my apologies, I think I did. So hook to pin. We talked about, somebody asked about pelvic setup and how that relates to calving. So I'll talk about pelvic setup. There's really only 3 things there. This hook, which is the tuber wing of the ilium, in the pelvis. Then we're talking about the pin, which is this bone here, which is the other end of the pelvis. And then we're talking about the hip, which is sort of hidden, but it's actually just there. I can feel it just there. What you want is as much width through the pins, this distance here.
Keep brushing.
Yep.
Brush.
Not possible. The pins as wide as you can get them, which pushes the hips out. And if we can get a look at this little heifer, the little yellow heifer in here, we'll have a look at an unbelievably good hip setup. It just narrows the birth canal. It's as simple as that. So the wider you can get these pins out, the better. One thing, like sometimes it's hard to pick, you know, if you're looking at one animal, unless you're really used to looking at them, it's a bit hard to pick that distance with the pins. Something I do with calves, or any animal, but easily with calves, is simply to put your hands on their, put the tip of your fingers on their hook and the palm of your hand on their hip. Put it in there and just see what sort of angle you've got. So if the head's at that end and you're behind and you're doing this, you can just shut your eyes and feel it, a bit narrow. That's to the hip, and the pin will follow the hip. If you put your hands on and they're dead flat, you go, whoa, this is nice. I like this. And every now and again you'll get one that the hips are out further than the hooks. And you go, this is exceptional. So there's some bulls around, and I keep relating back to bulls. I mean, obviously you've got your cows, but there's bulls around who will really put some width in the hips and the pins and widen that birth canal. The other thing with birthing is the height. Sorry, Jane. The height of the pin relative to the hook. So what we try and do is look at the bottom of the hook, draw a line parallel to the ground, and we get to the pin. If that's all in line, that's about how you want it. That's an aesthetic thing as much as anything, but if we find the pins are going up, which I don't know, does anybody follow any US cattle, let alone Highland cattle? That they're really selecting for higher pins and higher tail sets, and if their cattle don't have that, they gel it up and they really want this angle here. So they're actually selecting for higher pins. Anybody in the dairy industry would know that, tell me if I'm wrong here, but higher pins, better suspensory ligaments, tighter udder, that's a good thing, but you're still selecting for higher pins. So higher pins means when the calf's trying to come out, it's heading uphill a little bit. You know, that might only be an inch or 2 or maybe 3, but it's just a little bit harder for the calf to get out. If we're looking at shoulders, a bit like that hip that we were talking about, I was sort of trying to find where that hip was. This is good. And I had to point out that hip, and you ideally want to be able to do that with the shoulder as well. Like we can see the shoulder there. Yep. She's got not a lot of condition on. She's got a little bit of fat, but not much. She's had a calf, not concerned about that. If she was fat as mud, this would blend in a lot more. But one thing we can say is, yeah, when they're in this condition, you actually can see what you can see. And I like this, to be honest. This is how, oh, sorry, sweetie. This is how a cow should be if she's functional. If they've got a lot of fat on them, it's just a waste of your money, really, and a fertility problem. But we can see a bit of shoulder there, and that's probably a bit prominent. So if we're looking at that in a female, if we can imagine, just sort of shut your eyes and think about a calf coming up the body and heading forward towards the head, diving into the neck, when that calf's coming out, even though they have one leg forward and one leg back, if they read the book, if the shoulders are more prominent, it's just a much bigger obstacle to get out, and it's a hit. It's a hit all at once. What you want is you can have the same width over the shoulders, so you can have the same width through here, but if that transition forward to the neck is smooth, it's just a triangle that spreads the birth canal as she's pushing, versus coming in and then going straight out and trying to get past that sort of blockage. So the general rule is you want a smooth transition through the shoulder. So she's pretty good. Oh, is that what it is? Okay. Okay. Out of interest, if we look at that calf, that's better shoulders than mum. So if we go and look at the bull, my guess is he's got a pretty good shoulder transition. What do we think about this girl for Highland characteristics? Yep. Yeah. So she's nice. She's really nice. One thing we didn't mention were top lines. So Jane over there, just about at that hook area, rises up a little bit with her pelvis, so through the tail head, but pretty good, pretty good. In fact, there's not many in this crowd. There's not a lot of good examples of bad animals here, so my apologies for that. These guys have been selecting pretty well. But if we look at this girl for balance and structure, hello? If we're looking around here, we can see a better shoulder transition there. I'm just checking fat. She's a bit tubby. So fat's going to hide a lot of that shoulder transition. If we're going to look through the pelvis here, she's very similar with her good width through the pins. We have a look there at her hip. She's probably a little bit wider through the hips. She's got a bit more heel on her than both of those other two. If you were to look at her, this is her first calf. Yeah. So she's a 3-ish-year-old that's had her first calf, and you'd go, okay, that's a sweet little cow, like a wonderful animal just to be heading off on your breeding journey. You can go a lot of directions with her. This calf, if we look at her pelvic setup, like she's got these love handles here. Like she's a 3-year-old that's had a calf a little while ago. She's doing famously well to keep that sort of condition on. That's very easy doing if she's in the same paddock with the others. Let's imagine she is. She's got a 4-month-old calf-ish. You go, whoa, that's pretty bloody impressive that she can keep that condition on. So that's a big plus. However, if we look at the pelvic setup on this little girl, we'll just get her up there and then she'll turn around and face her mum. But how's the pins and hips there? They're ridiculously good. So that's a different pelvic setup to these heifers that I've looked at. Okay, so, and not that the others aren't good, I actually like their fleshing, but this one's got a different bone structure. So to get that shape through there, you need wider pins, you need wider hips, so that thing I was talking about, this calf is dead flat, maybe out a little bit with the hips. So that's an exceptional shape there and gives an impression of muscle through there. And I say the word impression because it doesn't actually mean there's more muscle. So I've used a few bulls myself that have done that, and yeah, there's other bulls like Kalen, who's the sire of these, that we'll get and have a look at. He has true muscle, but a different pelvic setup to this one. But that's super. I really like that. Good shoulder transition as well. Yeah, really nice little calf, that one. This girl is not a black thing, but she's very different again. You can see that she's a very balanced animal. Head proportion to body, shorter head, shorter body, thick and deep. She's still lovely. She stands wide. I remember seeing her at a show and yeah, I liked her straight away. If you wanted to do anything with her, you would probably just find a bull that's going to stretch her a little bit. We talked about calving and timing of calving, how old they are, other characteristics we use. These guys just said an interesting thing, is that she was a bit smaller when she was younger. So rather than use a formula to say get them in calf at 2 and have them calve at 3, rather than do that, which is what we do, what pretty much everybody does, they looked at her and thought, I think she'd be better off being left a little bit, give her an extra year. And as a cow, because they breed calves for 15 years, much better to have an animal that's established herself as a mature animal and going to hold her condition better of those first few calves by sacrificing a year at the start. This is an interesting group of wild heifers, as you can see. When you do your farm walk later on, we'll go see the boys and the grazing technique down here. Do we get to come up here and look at the bull?
We'll be coming back later.
Good. So keep this in your mind. Look at these heifers and look at what's similar about them. And if there's 6 animals here side by the same bull, you can nearly form a picture in your mind of what that bull looks like. I think you can try and probably pick his colour, but his shape. You know, he's a bull, these are females, but he's put quite a stamp on these. There's some, sorry? Yeah, there's some bulls that we call cookie cutter bulls that produce quite a consistent calf, and there's others that are a little bit hit and miss. Still some good ones, but a lot of tail end as well. To me, this guy, there's one tail end in here and 5 really nice heifers, so I think that's pretty consistent. And we were talking about pelvic shape and fleshing. If I put my hands there, oh my God, so she's level, but her hip isn't that high, unlike the little yellow heifer that had a nice high hip and gave a good physical shape through there. This girl has actually got the flesh in there. Not so much that she looks masculine or anything, but just a beautiful shape. She got a little bit of tub on her as well. She got just nice condition for a yearling. She's not skinny, but yeah, really nice fleshing all the way up through here and good width across there. Once again, have a look at the bull. So if we, oh, she's eating us. I don't know why she's been so good. If we can get width through here and a smooth transition through there, oh God, which she does, that's about as good as what you can possibly hope for. So we're getting bulk through here. Does anybody know why we want width through here as well as back here? Sorry?
Steak. A good steak.
Nice. So all of our best cuts of meat come from about here. So if we can get more width through there and more flesh, so more depth through there, makes a lot of people happy. Even if you only do a home kill, if you get a bigger steak, you're just going to eat more meat. So yeah, really, really nice heifer. And if we look at the back end shape on each of these, you can see something fairly similar amongst them. An interesting thing about these guys, relating to things we've already talked about, for that sort of thickness on a few of these animals, they still retain length. That's an unusual thing, so that's a really good balance thing to have. But also none of them look manly, masculine. So some of them can be beefy and just you go, not particularly feminine. But these guys across the board are still looking like really sweet heifers. So that's a great bunch to see. Also, if you look over their feet, as a group at 12 months old, mostly if they're average footed animals, this will be the best animal, whereas she's got the longest feet of any. So once again, go look at the bull. He's natural. Has he had his feet trimmed?
Never.
Oh, love it. Go look at the bull. Yeah. Any questions before we finish up? Beg your pardon?
What do you say, Jenny?
Baby's beautiful. Okie dokes. Well, hope you've enjoyed it and got a bit of something out of it.